There's a new Hulk Hogan documentary out on Netflix.
What is there to say about Hulk Hogan?
A life retrospective. Basically, it was interviews they did with him before he passed away.
I see.
Yeah, I believe it's like,
He did the series of interviews with the same people at the end of his life.
yeah, they interviewed him, his ex-wife, former co-workers and all that stuff. And I was going to give it the old college try because, I mean, I've made my feelings about Hulk Hogan known many times on the show before, but on the flip side, he also is a very important part of professional wrestling history. And as someone who enjoys history myself, I was going to give it the old college try to watch. And I got about an episode and a half in until Mango Mussolini himself appears
Whoa.
in a new interview. He even stated in the interview that he was putting off talking to the Russians over something to be able to talk about Hulk Hogan for a Netflix documentary.
Wow. So he was president when he was doing this.
Yeah, it was a recent interview within the past year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, just what you want the President of the United States doing, being a part of a documentary about professional wrestling.
On Netflix.
And I say this as a pro wrestling fan. And the documentary itself was co-produced by the WWE, so they had a lot of, footage from his career and all that. But once Mango Mussolini showed up, I turned it off, and I was already getting bad feelings about the documentary as well because they were trying to talk about, the Hogan character being like pro USA and all that stuff, and I just had a feeling that they were trying to sugarcoat his past and his actions.
Hmm.
And once Donald Trump showed up, I was like, okay, done. I'm
Hmm.
done. I don't need to see anymore. I know where this is going. There is one thing I can comment on the documentary. He did say that he and his family, after he appeared at the Republican National Convention in 2024, received death threats. That's wrong. That was wrong. I can vehemently disagree with him appearing there because that confirms all of the negative stuff you heard about him and his views on the world and on minorities, for instance. But nobody deserves a death threat for supporting a political candidate.
People who make public statements, I think, often get death threats. I don't think it's something that's unique to them.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned before, he was a public figure, and his persona is, still considered a public figure, even though he's no longer with us. And with the times that we live in today, people are getting more and more death threats when they do dip their toes into the political waters out there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that is par for the course for what you have to deal with. But I can on the one hand say that I feel Hulk Hogan was a loathsome human being in a lot of ways and a racist human being in a lot of ways, but also didn't deserve death threats. He just didn't. That was wrong. But that documentary, hot trash, avoid it like crazy. Because even the episode and a half I did see, old Carney Hogan was there. What do I mean by that? Professional wrestlers are notorious for not exactly telling the truth.
Hmm.
If they could bench press 200 pounds, they're going to tell people they could bench press 400 pounds. It's they're going to go above and beyond, and that hyperbole is something that I do like about the industry. When the actual show is on, but when you have someone like Hulk Hogan who had a long history of just continuously lying and lying and lying about everything, I think I've told you before, he told people in an interview that in '83, Lars Ulrich from Metallica contacted him to play bass in Metallica.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that
It's
didn't.
like an Al Gore kind of situation.
Well, about the internet thing,
Yeah.
well, the thing about that is my understanding is that the misconception that people have that Al Gore said that isn't exactly true. It was Republican propaganda that ended up working that made people believe that Al Gore said something like that. Now, Al Gore, if you look back at his speeches and all that stuff, not the most charismatic guy, not the most off the cuff guy. If you know, my understanding is that he just worded it incorrectly. Like, I think he was responsible for some legislation that helped the internet become as big as it was, because he was a pretty prominent senator back in the day.
Hmm.
He wasn't claiming he invented it, but Republican propaganda ended up, winning the day there.
Yeah, and since he's been hiding out, really.
Yeah, he'll show up on occasion, like he did show up on The Daily Show and commented on how Matt and Trey Parker from South Park have changed their tune about him in like Man Bear Pig.
Uh-huh.
Because initially, when Man Bear Pig was first a character on South Park, they were doing it to make fun of Al Gore,
Uh-huh.
and ultimately Trey and Matt changed their minds because they were ultimately thinking like, Al Gore may be right about this stuff when it comes to the environment.
Uh-uh.
And so, Al Gore, to his credit, came out and said, they changed their mind, good for them. So, something along those lines, a little more eloquently than me, listen to me tell, saying another human being can't say words correctly. And, we have over 300 and some odd episodes, no, 400 some odd episodes. Yeah, I was still right for over 300. But there you go, people. There's an example of why I should not be ridiculing Al Gore. Anyway, our friends are here.
Hey, look at that.
Hey, everybody, this is Tim the Nerd, and I am joined by Professor Aubrey. And it is Motherhood Month here on Friends Talking Nerdy. But what I thought would be very interesting would be to have a conversation about the flip side of things. We're going to have some great conversations with the Reverend. I'm going to have some great conversations with the Reverend Tracy about motherhood, as you deal with it with like kids and all that stuff. But I wanted to talk with you about the joys of not being a mother, plus some of the stressors that society will throw your way.
Well, I'm definitely an unmother. It's sort of like an unbirthday. Nobody celebrates it. I just came up with that. That was a great joke. But um, so, I think just from the get-go, we have to make clear that there's not necessarily judgment from a non-mother to a mother, or from a mother to a non-mother. Some people are judgmental and have, bullshit to say about, air quotes, breeders, right? On the one hand, and then people who are the stay-at-home dogma people on the other hand. But I think for the most part, people are pretty accepting of, you're not going to you don't have kids, or you don't want to have kids. I haven't felt like ostracized for that. Now, I have felt ostracized about other things. This is just one of the many things for which I could be ostracized. And this one didn't seem quite as bad as some of the others.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I'm sure we're going to dive into this as we go through the notes here. I can imagine that more than anything, it was probably just someone asking an innocent question like, "Oh, are you going to have a baby at some point?" Or not necessarily pressuring you. There are definitely horror stories out there, on both the pro mother and the non mother side of people having to deal with a bunch of nonsense, but. To your point, I think, yeah, most people in today's world especially get it. The fact of the matter is, like, even with something like a bachelor's degree, it is very expensive to, raise a child. And yeah, I don't think anybody's going to begrudge anybody for, not having a kid because they feel for whatever reason they just don't want to do the motherhood or the fatherhood thing at a particular point.
Vice versa. I know people who have always known they wanted to be parents, and that's the thing that they want to do in their life. And I'm all for that. Like, if it's going to be that important to you, absolutely, you should do that. What I can criticize about parents is that you become parents when you understand that there's no way that you're going to be able to successfully raise those children and give them a chance at whatever you want to give them a chance at, right? That is going to make it harder, what is already a hard thing. So there's that. There's also the people who just have no idea how to raise a child having children. That also annoys me.
Yeah, I'll
I
raise my hand. I've mentioned I've been a part of that group. Now I think I've made some big time strides. With my kids being older and whatnot to help mend some of the mistakes I made as a parent. But looking back, I wasn't good. I'm going to be honest.
Sure. I mean, you were young and uninformed, and
Horny as hell, unfortunately. Come here.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Wear condoms, kids.
Well, leaving that aside, it is still something worth noting that you don't have children. And it is not something worth noting that you do. It is a default. That parenthood is a default. When things are defaults, like being heterosexual is a default, being cisgender is a default, what have you, depending on what company you're keeping, right? Like if you're hanging out with a bunch of doctors, like let's say for some reason you're invited to some kind of reception where there are a bunch of doctors, they're going to assume you have something to do with the medical profession, So same thing, like if you're hanging out with a bunch of people with bachelor's degrees, they probably just assume that you also have one because always have to see ourselves mirrored in other people. We have to make assumptions about them that they're like us.
Well, and that's true. I mean, if you're a parent, you're generally going to be hanging around more than likely with other adults who have kids themselves. For it could be for simple reasons like play dates or something like that. But these are people that know the struggles that you're going through and are able to help you out a lot better than someone who may not be a parent themselves. That doesn't mean like non-parent friends couldn't help with like babysitting or whatever. But you get my point. It's just natural instinct that parents will want to hang around with other parents, and people that don't have kids will want to hang around with other people who don't have kids. Because if you're making that choice to not have kids because you realize that you're not like a kid person and not don't feel comfortable with the power that you have as a parent, yeah, I can understand, not wanting to hang around with someone who has like three toddlers.
Yeah, sure. And, people will come and go out of your life for various reasons, and that's one, right? They're in your friend group because you have kids that hang out together. Doesn't even mean that you like hanging out with them. It's just they're a default friend because you interact with them a lot because you both have kids.
Right.
The question is, what if not having kids is actually a fulfilling, intentional life path? Or is it always the creature of circumstance? So, like people who can't have children for some physiological reason are the only people who are allowed to not have children.
Well, that mindset right there, is going to be held more from people who feel that like the only reason a man and a woman should have sex is for procreation purposes and stuff like that.
Which unfortunately is some proportion of the population.
Unfortunately, yeah. As far as the question goes, not having kids can be a fulfilling, intentional life path. I mean, if you want to be like a brain surgeon, for instance, and yes, there are brain surgeons with kids out there, but becoming a brain surgeon takes many, many, many years of training to get to that point. And, with doctors, they don't work a 9 to 5 type of schedule. At minimum, they probably have a 12-hour day, more than likely much longer than that. And, being away from, family and things like that, that can cause a lot of stress. Granted, brain surgery, the money you make as a brain surgeon can help alleviate some of that because of nannies and stuff like that. But still, though, like, having kids, like if you're in college or whatever, and then your kid gets sick and needs to go to the doctor right away, you have to miss some class, and that could hurt you. Or, yeah, like, if you're like a brain surgeon in the middle of surgery or something like that, and then you find out your kid got hit by a bus, what's that going to do? I mean, more than likely, the brain surgeon, if you're in the middle of surgery, you're going to want to continue on, but your mind is elsewhere at that point.
Well, they probably wouldn't interrupt the surgery to tell them.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was just an example. I'm not, privy to, even though my mother had 10 brain surgeries, you would think this is something I would know.
Yeah.
But, I'm not privy to, protocol and stuff like that. And it would make sense for, important negative life information like that to not be given during the middle of a surgery. But, taking any sort of time off if you have a profession like that, or think about someone in your profession, a lawyer. It's hard. It takes a lot of time to be able to go through college, get your degree, get your law license, and all that stuff. And then that's not taking into account the amount of work that you have to do. Because when you first start off, you're probably bottom of the barrel at a law firm and doing a lot of the grunt work that the partners in a law firm, don't really have the time to do. It's not that they couldn't do it, but, if they're the head of the firm, they got other things to do themselves.
Right. And depending on there's a lot of 16-hour day kind of situations. So similar to the MDs, I think the lawyers who you think of when you think of lawyers, the people in the big buildings
The
and
back,
wearing the suits every day, those kind of lawyers are similar to the MDs in that the idea is they make so much money, they can pay for every kind of service there is so that all they have to do is concentrate on their work. It romanticized in my 30s the overwork of being a new attorney, like just the pure overwork. But anyway, that, brings up what about people who have kids in the workplace? I think it is a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, someone with kids is going to be distracted or not spend as much overtime if you're salaried, right? Just have different priority, have to run off in the middle of the day, like you were saying, because your kid not got run over by a bus. Obviously, you would run around then, but like your kid for the sixth time in the last 6 months is ill and can't go to preschool, and so you have to take the day off. And the other side, which is what is wrong with this person that they don't have children, assuming that somebody who doesn't have kids is somehow weird.
and that's something that I, can honestly say I never really questioned that myself. Now, just because I have felt that way for my life doesn't mean other people do. I completely understand that society as a whole will generally have weird views of people that don't have kids. But, that's one thing, like myself, like, because it's like, becoming a parent, I became a parent when I was 24, right? So the very early stages of my adulthood. And so most of my adult life has been taken up by, kids and whatnot. So I can see what the benefits would have been if had not, done anything that would have led to me being a parent. That does not mean by in any way, shape, or form that I regret being a parent. I'll make that 100% clear. But you can see the benefits by going through the negatives of the parenthood side of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're like mirrors. The good things about being childless are the bad things about being parents, and vice versa.
Yeah, there are pros and cons with anything. And, ultimately we would want society to encourage people to have that mindset so that if they wanted to be a parent, they would go into it full force and, be happy with that decision. But on the flip side, if they did not want to be a parent, hopefully there would be a time to where people would not be ostracized or whatever. But, you know, yeah.
And autonomy and personal freedom go both ways. Like, you should be able to choose to have children and have that be the most fulfilling thing in your life. And what you spend all of your time doing, you also don't have to do that. And it's things like, if I were to say to you, having children interferes with your ability to pursue your passions, wouldn't it be a little presumptuous to look at a parent and say they're not able to do that when perhaps parenthood is their passion?
Well, that is something to consider. If you think about it, for let's say someone has dreams of being a creative of some sort, whether that be working in theater on the stage or behind the scenes, being a writer, being a part of something. You get my point.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff like that takes a lot of personal sacrifice, and you it with that personal sacrifice, basically, like if you wanted to get in theater, for instance, you would essentially start in the community theater route, per se. You also do the college route as well. But that's a lot of time that you're taking away from, other pursuits, sometimes for very little or no money at all. And when you have kids, you don't have that luxury. Now, that does not mean you can't do that. There are people that, are, of lower incomes that are able to make it work. It's just much harder to do so. And, think of what it was like for, me being a parent in the younger days as well. Like, I had a wife who was, for various reasons, considered disabled and collecting disability. So if I did something that earned a little bit more money, we could have essentially lost all the benefits that she was getting.
Hmm.
And that would have negatively affected, like our finances. That would have affected the type of, healthcare she could have gets. So, it was like a catch 22 in that situation. It's like I had plenty of dreams, but if I gambled on something and it didn't work out, we'd be screwed.
So when you talk about personal freedom and autonomy for someone who's in that situation, it's easy to see how there would be very little of that allowed in a structure like that. In the situation that you described with your wife on disability, there is a real benefit to not being married, because if you're not married, you're not economically responsible for each other. You're responsible for your kids, but you're not responsible for the other person. And so that person's income is nothing. So it's a negative on getting married when you have kids, which seems like it should be the opposite. It seems like whatever shouldn't be penalizing people for having children.
Yeah, you tell me I could have done that now.
Right. I mean, and people don't know. And they think the thing to do is to get married because that's what society tells us is the good thing to do. When
Yeah.
really, depending on your situation, it really might not be, because marriage and not marriage is economic.
It's a business. You're putting together a financial arrangement with another human being. It is no different than a business. It is a business arrangement at the end of the day. And why do I say it like that? Because when you go through a divorce, they're going to divvy up the money. Even if like you had like no kids or anything like that, there are still some shared things that you have together with somebody that thanks to divorce, it'll have to be split up, or figured out who gets what at that point. It is a business arrangement exclusively.
That was all it was ever intended to be as well. So a single person is an economic unit, just like a family is an economic unit. If you don't have kids, even as a single person, it is possible to support yourself, right? You don't have to have a spouse or children economically. Whereas it might seem to benefit families to have kids in varieties of ways, right? If you're a married person, people will encourage you to have kids, whether that makes economic sense for you or not. But you're absolutely right. It's like a business. And so you have to have the same values as the other person when it comes to money. And maybe your value is to have an emergency fund. And that's what's most important to you. And what's most important to me is to pay my house off. And so I'm going to make we're going to make different financial choices. We have to harmonize those things. And that can be very difficult and full of conflict.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't want to be with somebody whose attitude is mine and what's yours is mine.
Oh yeah.
You'll get burned.
Yeah, and I think that's a trope. Is that what a trope is? Like it's a stereotype. It's a stereotype of the
Of divorced people that it's all about, getting as much as
and
you can.
typically women. Yeah. And typically women that are trying to get stuff that they're not entitled to, essentially.
To me, the way I see it is this: it's kind of like, the incidents you hear of negative stuff happening on public transit in a place like Portland, Oregon, for instance. It sucks when it happens, but percentage wise, 98% of the time when you drive, when you take advantage of TriMet or something like that in Portland, you're not going to be dealing with a crazy psycho who wants to hurt people
Mhm.
like on the bus or the train. And it sucks when it happens. And there are, when it comes to divorce, look at me, I'm comparing like murder on a bus to divorce. I mean, it sucks when it happens, but there are examples out there of people that had a lot of money for attorney's fees, and you had, attorneys trying for, like Paul McCartney, his
Right.
second wife,
Right.
that did not go well, but they ended up having a lot of money to be able to do that. But 9 times out of 10, it is much more straightforward, and the law will, make sure that there's equity,
Well, it's supposed to. I
supposed
don't
to.
think it will. I don't think I don't think a lot of domestic judicial decisions are fair
I-
because there's a winner and loser if you're in front of a judge. And what you need to have in a domestic situation is people who are rowing in the same direction,
yeah.
not refusing to speak to each other, for example. You could be married though and not have kids. You don't have to be single and not have kids. And those are the people who have a lot of money because they have two incomes and they're paying essentially for one set of expenses. So one house, one utility bill. They have two incomes. Usually people get with their own socioeconomic level person and they have, whatever that equals. Those people are going to be more able to maintain their class category than people who have children, just because children are so expensive, as
Yeah.
we've talked about.
Yeah.
On the one hand, having kids makes you more vulnerable to bad economics. I would say, on the whole, probably that's the bigger risk than being single and being subject to bad economics because things like you're talking about with your ex wife, the ceiling that you have to stay under in terms of your income is often so low that it's better to be single, right? Sometimes it's better to be a family, sometimes it's better to be single in terms of having supports. There are lots of financial consequences of having kids or not having kids. That's right, because you owe the duty of care to your children. You're paying to raise them. That's just it. And everybody has to pay when there's a divorce with child custody. Where it gets really unfair is that the custodial parent is not required to spend the money, period. They're supposed to spend the money on the children, but that's not really what happens when you have to use child support to pay your rent, right? And your food and all of those things.
But having said that, like for something like that, I got no problem with that myself. The only problem I would have would be if like my kids had like no clothes on their back, but the ex-wife had the brand new iPhone,
Right.
or went on a cruise, or had a fur coat, or something stupid like that. It's like I get what you're saying, but stuff like paying rent is
Sure, sure,
it
sure.
contributes.
You gotta have a place for your kids to sleep, I suppose.
Yeah, and if you're buying clothes or buying food with it, that that's fine. But if you're buying trinkets for yourself, taking that money to like a jewelry store and buying, stuff for yourself solely, then you're an evil human being and you should be shot into the sun.
Yeah, as soon as you have kids, the kids become more important than you are
Yeah, that never ends.
in terms of how society views you.
They are your legacy. They really are. And like I am there for my oldest and my youngest. My middle kid is still mad at me, for legitimate reasons, and doesn't want to talk to me at the moment. And I'm not going to push that or whatever. But if she wanted to, regular interactions with me, I would gladly give it to her. But I like my oldest, for instance, on occasion will be like, hey. Like I'm short on rent or I'm short on this. Can I get some gas money or something like that? If I have the ability to do so, I'm going to gladly do that. But that's extra money coming out of my pocket, and but on the flip side, that's what I signed up for, as a parent. Like if I have the ability to help make sure my kids have you know, like a little extra gas in the tank or, whatever, I'm going to do it, within reason. If I suspected like the kids were using it to like buy, crystal meth or whatever, different story. But
Sure.
I don't think that's happening with my kids,
Yeah. No, it doesn't seem to be. No.
No, no, no. They're smart. They're smart.
Yeah, and well, that sort of brings up mental health and emotional consequences of either having kids or not having kids. So another one of these things that is like there are two sides of the coin is stress. People who have kids report being very stressed out because they are responsible for another human being. At the same time, people who have kids say that it's the most beautiful, wonderful thing that's ever happened to them. There is some stress relief in having such a wonderful thing happening in your life, right? So, on either side, the person with kids could say, my kids bring so much into my life. And the person without kids could say, but, I don't want those things in my life.
But that's fair to bring up,
And
though.
I mean, you said your legacy, and that's true. Your kids are your legacy, and I don't have that legacy.
You don't have the legacy in terms of a human child that you help bring into the world, but you do have a legacy that you are building. Like like, and I hope this is at your 120th birthday that you fall asleep, and then that's when you pass away and all that stuff on the 120th birthday, right?
Yeah.
At that point, your legacy will be like the financial legacy that will be used to help the Humane Society here in Oregon. Your legacy is different, and it is just because it's different, it doesn't mean it's less than a parent with human kids or whatever. And just think of the legacy of what people will think of you when you pass on. And yeah, 100 years down the road, 500 years down the road, nobody's going to be talking about you or I. I get that, but that doesn't mean you don't have a legacy. It's just different. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. I think, for me, I think about genetics. Yeah, I'm a dead end for my grandparents. You know what I mean? Like their kids had kids, but their grandkids didn't have kids. And for my parents, their kids didn't have kids. And that's a dead end genetically. So you sort of erase yourself from the future.
Well, if I get rich and famous at some point in the future, and after your 120th birthday, if you do pass away, I can clone you. Gonna go on, But
Yeah.
but anyway.
So that's just about stress. I think people who don't have kids have a lot more time to do things other than go to work and hang out with their kids, right? You can, have hobbies of your own. You can have friends of your own that you spend time with.
Well, that is the thing to remember too when it comes to kids. Like, kids, it doesn't matter what their age will be, there's always going to be something that you're going to be doing with them. But the really intensive period of to where you really have to be involved in every single aspect of their life is really very early on. Once the kid gets to the point to where they're going to school, you do have the ability to resume, like playing video games, for instance. Like when my daughter was born, I stopped playing video games. It's not that I, started hating video games. I loved video games then. I love video games now. But with a baby in the house, you don't have time for video games. However, once she was old enough to start going to school and stuff like that, and getting her own interest in everything, then I had some of that time come back. So, I get what you're saying, but that is something to consider about parenthood as well. It's that, there is always going to be some sacrifices of your life that you have to give to them, but that is also dependent on where they are at in their life. Because if your kid is in a stage to where they're potty training and stuff like that, spending 2 hours playing Madden on your PlayStation and not focusing on where the kid is going to where the kid is at, you're going to have some messes to clean up. you know?
Yeah. And these just aren't the kinds of things that people without kids have to think about.
Well, it's to me, it's like with anything that you get involved in, there's going to be a pro and a con. Like if you have the ability to be a part of a career that just speaks to you, something you wanted to do since you were a kid, and you finally get that opportunity to do it, you're going to love it, but there will still be stress involved, some negative aspects involved.
Hmm.
Like for you, I don't know if you were a kid that dreamed of being a lawyer or whatnot.
No.
Okay, but there are people that do have that dream, and they go, through law school, get their law license, and start working and whatnot, and they're fulfilling their dream, and they have a lot of great experiences. But I think they would also tell you that there are some negative aspects to the whole process of being a lawyer and rising up the ranks in lawyerdom.
For either side, there are things that are unattainable for sure. Like somebody without kids can't go up in a balloon, a hot air balloon, and not be thinking of their children and being a little bit scared that their kids aren't going to have parents anymore. Right? That's a fear.
What if it pops?
But, I wouldn't have the same fear. I would only be afraid of what's going to happen to me. So, I think what we keep talking about are these trade offs, but it's not all pros and cons. Some of the trade offs equal out, And if you're opting out entirely of having children, a lot of the exhaustion you avoid, but also a lot of the reward you avoid. You don't have to balance that if you're if you're a non-parent. You can just do things that are rewarding.
Well, true, but like I said, for the people that don't have kids or whatever, they're still going to have stress in their life. It's just to your point. Let's say a single person who rents an apartment or whatever becomes unemployed for a significant enough period that they get put out on the streets. Very stressful. But the one part of the stress that they would not have to worry about is the fact that they have another human life that they have to care about as well,
Hmm.
because that can make people a lot more stressed And that happens. That happens. People, we've talked about on the show before, there are tons and tons of poor people who have one, two, three jobs and still do Uber on the side. And depending on where they're at in the country, just financially still aren't able to make it. And that is ridiculous that that is the case, right? I mean, and we're not talking about, the people that just decide, hey, I'm gonna just sit at home and watch TV all day, and then bad things start happening to them. But that's more the exception to the rule. Most people want a roof over their head. They want clothes on their back, and they understand that it will take work to do that. But anyway, you get my point.
Yeah, it's another one of the savage inequalities of our society where somehow one person's labor is worth next to nothing and another person's labor is worth $1 billion and the whole spectrum in between, right? Like, even if it's just $100,000 versus $25,000, is what the one person's doing so much better or more important? Sometimes, yeah, if you're a cancer researcher or something, I want you to be not worried about money. I want you just to be worried about cancer.
But think of those personal injury lawyers too. They make a lot of
Right.
money as well. And there are some that do good work. I'm not going to go off and claim that they're not. But if their pictures on the back of a phone book or on a bus
Or a
or
billboard or
or billboard or something like that, uh, it's easy to have skeptical eyes about how honest they are at what they do.
yeah.
Because you think of that old ambulance chaser stereotype and whatnot, and there are plenty in the legal profession that would do that.
Yeah, and there's lots of people who get paid more than they should, and lots of people who get paid less than they should. Like, if if our society valued what they say they value,
Yeah,
right? Like, then teachers would get a lot more money, right?
yeah, they wouldn't have to go on their social media with their Amazon wish list and hope their family and friends can help pay for
Notebooks,
supplies that is part of their job. And like,
crayons.
yeah, like if you work at a grocery store, people, imagine having to put an Amazon wish list to come up with the money for your uniform at work. It's, yeah,
Well, some places you have to buy your own uniform.
you get my point though.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm just saying it's even worse than that. It's even worse than that because you have to pay for your own.
yeah. Shut up, to you.
Um, and so again, this brings up lifestyle freedoms, and you're sort of free to be who you want to be because you don't have to be a parent. And a parent is an all-encompassing kind of thing to some extent. Like, obviously, parents don't just not ever do anything again. Like, most of the accomplished people in the world and throughout history have been parents.
Yeah, people can walk and chew gum at the same time, but if you are a parent, especially in the very early years of your child's development and growth, your time 9 times out of 10 is going to be directed towards their growth and not your own personal growth. And like the older the kid gets, yeah, you can start picking up some hobbies again and start enriching your life, which ideally in a perfect world you would have a partner that would help you have that as a parent, give you that while you're in the midst of the younger years as well. But there is sacrifice, because again, if you got a 3-year-old, as a kid, spending all days playing video games is not the best use of your time when you got a toddler. If they're 13 years old and you want to play some video games, slightly different story, but that doesn't mean you still don't have responsibilities to, make sure they eat for the night or doing their homework or something like that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. There's differences in how old kids are, and boy, they grow up fast, don't they?
Yes, they do. You get so lost in the day-to-day minutia of parenthood that
Yeah.
by the time they get to be adults, you're just like, What?"
And it just is such a small period in your life and a small period in their life, their childhood,
Yeah.
and you only get one. No one will ever take care of you like that again.
But
Maybe, I don't know. But maybe somebody will take care of you like that who's not your child or not your parent. Anywho, these are some of the social pressures and expectations that happen. And, like we were saying, it's a default. Getting married and having kids is default. If I ran into someone who I hadn't seen in 10 years, I would assume that very quickly I'm going to ask them, "How's your family?" in order to learn what does that mean for them, you know? And hopefully then I can find out if they have kids or they don't have kids without having to come out and say, "Do you have kids?" I don't ask people that ever.
yeah, because most of the time parents will be more than happy to just give that information freely anyway.
Right, usually you already know because 'cause they've got a kid with them, or there's some indication, right, that they're a parent. But it's like that question when you meet somebody about what do you do? It's a similar kind of question for me, and I don't ask people that question either because I feel like it centers the wrong things.
And I get that. I think having that mindset kind of, if more people had that, then this whole Judeo-Christian mindset of, you must get married, you must have kids, and you must do this and you must do that would hopefully diminish in people's minds as time goes on. Yeah, having said that, to be clear, I'm not saying people should not get married. I'm not saying people should not have kids, but the default title that people are giving, adults that do want to get married or something like that, or have even a romantic relationship like Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn, for instance. They've lived together, they have kids, but they never got legally married, and that was their choice. But it's like, I just wish that wasn't the default. The default should be, what do you want? What's going to make you happy? Because then, if you have that mindset, then you're not going to be a dick to people, or even unintentionally, because you already brought it up. There are women that, for whatever reason, can't get pregnant, that maybe would want to get pregnant, and if they're having it constantly thrown in their face, when are you going to have a family? When are you going to have a family? That
Or
could be bad.
imagine you just had a miscarriage. You run into somebody in the grocery store and they ask you if you have kids. Like it's just it's a minefield that you can completely avoid by not,
But not.
not caring about that information.
Yeah, about not having that mindset of the default is adults get married and have kids and this and that, because that default that people have had over the years, if you take it into, because the default for romantic love in the past has been one man and one woman,
Hmm.
when no, it's not. It's never really been that, I mean, there are different types of romantic love that you can have out there,
Yeah.
LGBTQ people have always been there, people, and yeah, you can't think of that default, like,
Well, I think the default world exists and none of us are default. I don't think anybody's default. So it's limiting to everyone. It doesn't really have value in terms of human fulfillment. So I think best avoided. So, what are some things that I've heard people say? You'll change your mind. Ooh, I've heard that so many times. So many times, especially from older people, like my grandparents' age. Like, just not even, just saying, you don't know what you're talking about. You're fucking your life up. You're going to regret what you're doing. Who will take care of you when you're old? To this, I say, how does having a child in any way guarantee you that you're going to have somebody to take care of you when you're old?
especially if you screw things up so bad that they don't want to talk to you anymore, you know, and it's like there is no legal responsibility that your kid has to make sure that your older years are as peaceful as possible if like you get super sick or anything like that. It's great when it can. It's great when they can, but you know, especially in today's economy too, you know, there are a lot of kids that would love to help, you know, their parents in their older years, but are not financially able to pull it off.
And honestly, I've never met an older person who would want their children to do that, honestly. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they want their children to be out living their lives, not taking care of their elderly parents.
I mean, I've seen it before. Like, my aunt, when you know her husband, his father lived with him for the remaining years of his life, and I think it was due to like medical issues he was having. And typical Irish family, there was a lot of yelling involved there because of that. But you know, but that's also a different story too, because even in old age, you will have a lot of you know, parents of like adult kids who still treat their adult kids like kids, you know,
Yeah.
and you know that can grate on people quickly. You know, I know back in our archive we did talk about the multi-generational home and how it's only been recently in the United States, thanks you know to you know, after World War II, the GI Bill and everything like that, that it was possible for people to have a single family home, and you know how that's now become the normal, the default, quote unquote, and how that might not be a good thing, but it is what it is. It's like, yeah, there are going to be some adult kids that don't want anything to do with their parents. Like if my dad called me today and said, "I'm sick, and can I live with you?" Like, haha, bye, click, you know, and it wouldn't have even got that far. But you know, there are also some adult kids that would love to help, but just aren't able to do so for whatever reason. Think about Bruce Willis, for instance. With his current medical issues being what they are, they have to Bruce Willis essentially lives in another house now, with full time medical care there because you know, he just needs that care. And, you know, it's not that his family didn't want to help him out as best they could, but sometimes you need that official medical care to be the one to take over to help out, you know, especially in cases like his.
Sure, and I'm sure the alternative was to be in a group setting with that kind of care. So all the better to just have your own little hospital.
Yeah. After all those wacky movies he did at the tail end of his career, that's what's paying for it. But
Yeah, poor guy.
yeah. Anyway,
I'm not religious, but there's huge religious expectations on women to have children. The procreation is seen as necessary to the continued existence of the religion, which is why religions exist, which is to perpetuate themselves. Why? There's no reason. It was a method of exerting control, particularly over single women who, if they were educated, would be capable of doing what men can do intellectually.
yeah, I've been listening to some episodes of Behind the Bastards. Are you familiar with that podcast?
I think so.
Yeah, it's actually based out of Portland, Oregon here. The host is an independent journalist and everything, but the episodes I've been listening to are in their archives about the rise of conservatism. And there was this thing called the Powell Doctrine, I believe it was called. And, you know, it did talk about how limiting people's access to stuff like education would make them more compliant,
Yeah, of course.
because the more people know about how much they're getting screwed, the more they would want to change that. And, you
I
know,
mean, there's a reason the slaves were not allowed to read.
well, there was a reason, you know, the church for many years was against stuff like the printing press because before the printing press, they were the one that had the Bible. It
Mhm,
wasn't the parishioners.
mhm.
But once the parishioners were able to get their hands on the Bible, that's when questions started being asked. And you had, you know, your Martin Luthers, your John Calvins, and all the other people that came about. Marty Episcopalian, right? So,
Marty.
yeah, anyway.
Oh, Marty, love Marty. Then you've got, things at the workplace as well, like when you get hired, do they assume that you already have kids? Do they assume you'll want to have kids? Like, if you're a young woman, are you gonna not get hired over a young man because they think you're gonna, in 5 years, you're gonna have a kid and play less of a role?
Well, that can happen to parents too. I mean, if you think about it, like I've heard people, say, if you are going into a job interview, don't have your wedding ring on. Because then they would, they're not supposed to ask you, but like a cop, the people in the interviews are generally going to try to slip in some questions to get you talk about things that, to voluntarily give information about
Sure,
things
or
that
the
they're not.
person doing the interview has no clue what's allowed and not allowed,
Yeah,
right? They're just talking.
but yeah, if they find out you have kids and whatnot, their big concern is that you're gonna have to call out a lot because your kid will get sick. So why would I want to hire you when I have this person who doesn't have kids who can do the same job and won't call out as much?
Yep. And so we've got society telling us women that the ultimate fulfillment is to have children, while we are penalized for having children or even for having the ability to have children. So again, it's really weird because society should be supporting, based on the cultural norms, society should be supporting people's ability to have children. But it seems like many things are not economically beneficial for families. So policies that could change that would be useful.
Yeah, like, as we've talked about in our archives, like, with the rise of, single family homes and whatnot, that was due to government programs that was allowing people the financial freedom to be able to, purchase those homes and have families in those homes and everything like that. And that was a time when the government was working overtime for the people, and that allowed people to be more comfortable in terms of having kids and whatnot. And you take a look at today, there are studies out today showing that people are having less and less kids. And I would even go so far as to say it's not because people are any less inclined to have kids than they were at any time in the past, but I think they are just very much mindful of what the economy is like today. Like if me at 24 could have been transported to today, I think, and I'm 49 as I say this, I think, with the economy being what it is today, if I were 24 and still a viral, strapping young man, I think I probably would have handled things a little differently because of how expensive things are. It's expensive to live on your own, much less taking care of other lives.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of things that have changed to make having kids less desirable, like environmental issues, climate change,
Politics.
politics. Like, is there going to be nuclear war here any moment? Like, possibly. So, there are lots of political reasons to not have kids as well.
But yeah, to your point, for the people that continuously harp on the fact that, people should be having kids and do this and do that and do this, they would gladly do it if the situations in place allowed them the freedom to do that. You know, I mean, you're always going to have your people that are just horn dogs and whoops, kids come. That happens. But I do think you would have more people considering having kids if, if, the economy was much better than what it is. But with the current mindset out there, not going to happen.
Sure. I mean, I think obviously if people have more resources, they get to make more decisions that are actually what they want as opposed to being acted upon.
But also on the flip side, like if there is someone that does not want to be a parent in any way, shape, or form, the hounding of them is also ridiculous. It should be appreciated and celebrated that people have made a concerted point to live a fulfilling life that makes them happy. And if
Yeah.
that means that happiness does not involve kids in any way, shape, or form, all the better.
I think it's very important that we normalize lifestyles that anybody might choose, right? So, parenthood, not parenthood. Are you gay? Are you not gay? Are you, into math? Or are you more verbal? People have differences, right? We can categorize them in many, many, many different ways. But
I don't associate with people who do the math. Anyway,
like, it should be just as okay to be a mathematician as it is to be a literature major.
it should. It should. I mean,
And that applies to everything across the board. Like, it should be okay to make the choice in any dichotomy, no matter what the choice is. Who am I to tell you which you have to choose? And that's a very what libertarian anarchist kind of view.
it gives freedom to the people to make their own choices, which I think is what, we're ultimately trying to celebrate here, folks, because, it's not about trying to scare people into not having kids. We're not trying to do that here. I think it's just recognizing that there are going to be pros and cons with whatever, and I think people help should be happy enough in their own lives to be able to make a choice and not have other people ridicule them for that. Like if you're a 23-year-old woman and you're just getting out of college and you want to have a career, with a big prestigious company. And I can imagine having like your mother constantly harping on you to get married and have kids. I'd find that just thinking about that annoys me all to hell.
Hmm.
But having to deal with that 10 times worse, right? In reality, the mother in question should be happy that her daughter is happy and fulfilling, her dreams and whatnot. And if the daughter's 23, who's to say she can't have a kid at a later age if she so chose, right?
Yeah, and I gotta say, shout out to my family who has never pressured me to have kids at all. I think it's pretty rare that there's a family where neither of the children are having children, where the potential grandparents haven't expressed that they would like to see some children.
I mean, thankfully I'm not a grandfather. I think my kids, talking with my oldest, for instance, I think he was very much aware of the financial struggles me and his mother had, while they were growing up, and so I think he is a lot more responsible than I was at his particular age, which is what it is. But to me, it's like I don't know what I would do if he said, "You're a grandfather now." But if that conversation never happens, if I never become a grandfather, I'm not missing anything.
Well, good.
It is their choice if they want to have kids or not. The only thing I would tell them, and if all three of them are listening to this episode, make that choice when you want to make that choice. Don't be stupid like me, and have that choice just, you know, the Ross statue. Um, but make that choice if and or when you want to make that choice. And if the choice is to never have kids, then you never have kids. It's their choice. That's how it should be. People should not be pressuring their kids to become parents themselves, you know.
Or not, to some extent, I think I was encouraged by society to not have children because I saw what happened to women who had children.
They meet guys like me. Anyway,
It's interesting to think about what would life be like? What would you have done had you had no limitations? Would you have chosen to have kids or not? If you knew that you were going to have more economic success if you did not have kids. Did that enter into your mind at all?
sadly, it didn't. I'll put it this way: if like me of today if you wanted to take like the premise of a silly rom-com or something like that, if the me of today could be transported in time back to like 21-year-old Tim, to where how I think of life today could be that version of Tim and not the 21-year-old douchebag version that I was at that particular time, I think more than likely I probably would have chosen not necessarily to go that route. If I did decide to go that route, I think I would have made a lot more effort to find the right partner to do it with,
Mm.
because I did not find the right partner to do it with. And to be fair, she can say that about me. We were just not right. And if I had taken that time to get to know somebody a little more than 6 months before, taking on major responsibilities like marriage and parenthood and all that stuff, things could have potentially have been different. But having said that, my life is what it is. It's like I can either sit back and grumble and be depressed about all the things that could have happened, or I can do what I can to try to make today as good as it possibly can be. Because for all the negatives that I have personally experienced, I still find myself in Portland, Oregon with a vast wealth of experience. Just meeting some wonderful people like yourself, the Reverend Tracy, all kinds of other people along the way. And my life is so much more different now than what it would have been if I had stayed in Grand Rapids.
Oh, sure. Yeah, me too. When I think back of where I came from, I can't imagine what I would be like if I was still there.
Yeah, because like I've, written my memoirs in the past before, and I, let a few people read them, and a friend of mine who I used to go to high school with is one of them that I let read it, and he recently reached out, said that he was rereading it, and he screenshotted a section that I wrote about how he and I were friends because we kind of understood each other in a way that we were scared about life,
Mm,
and we were and that fear of life in terms of the other responsibilities made it to where we were easily able to talk each other out of taking major risks and anything like that. And I just think like if I had stayed in Grand Rapids, that would not have changed.
mm.
And that's not to say I'm the most daring risk-taking son of a bitch in the world today, but I'm a
It
long.
means it means something to be successful in something risky,
Yeah.
right? And moving to a new city is risky.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like I'm in Portland, Oregon, and to me, this is the absolute perfect place for me, weird though I am.
Well, I think the take home point was very clear. That is, you got to be respectful of people no matter whether they're choosing to have kids or choosing not to have kids. And, let's normalize not caring about people's reproductive states, right? Let's normalize not asking. Let's normalize not caring, having it have no impact whatsoever on your opinion of that person or what they do. Can we do that, do you think?
I think we can, and I think with the economy being what it is today, I think a lot of people, like I mentioned, they're choosing not to have kids because of stuff like the economy, and I think the more people think that, the more down the road the more it will become much more normalized to not pressure somebody to have kids and whatnot, because there is nothing worse than people being a parent that should not be a parent, right? People that maybe had delusions of grandeur of what parenthood would be and didn't realize all of the negative stuff that could potentially happen. Because kids will have their own emotional life struggles and everything, and it will throw you for a loop. It will burn your soul to see them in such pain and everything like that. But, anyway, be happy with the choices that you make. And if you are a person that does not want kids in your life, we celebrate that here. But we also celebrate people that do want kids in their life. It's just, when we talk about the subject of motherhood, I think it is important to be able to look at both sides of this particular issue because there are definitely positives of being a parent, but there are also some positives of not having kids at all.
Yeah, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of benefits on both sides, and there's a lot of risks on both sides. And what I think both of us don't want to see is people who don't want to have kids having kids because they think that that is what they have to do to be a grown up.
Yeah, yeah, I can tell you from experience, folks, that is not the case. It
But don't you remember, like, early adulthood? It's like, oh, I'm gonna get my own. I'm gonna move out into my own place. If it was me today, I'd be staying in my parents' place for as long as they would let me.
Yeah, no, like the reason I got married was I thought it was the right thing to do. And no, it wasn't. It wasn't. It would have been the right thing to do if I had known that woman long enough to see whether it was a compatible partnership to something to consider. I didn't take that time. She didn't take that time. We just rushed into things and then at that point it's just like, we got to try and keep it alive, right? No, no. I think it's like people just make the best possible choice. It's like it's like we've talked about with relationships before. No relationship is ever guaranteed to last for the rest of your life. It's just not. And you should understand that there are going to be times that you have someone in your life that can be in your life for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That at the end of that 50 years time, for whatever reason, your paths diverge. That happens. And I think more people should recognize that for what it is. But yeah,
It's
just
just not a failure.
it's not a failure. And it's not a failure if, after 1 month time of being with someone, you decide it's not working out. That is the right thing to do. Why try to keep something going that is just not working out for both people? Because when it is a relationship, and yeah, you can throw poly people into this.
Get into this thing, though.
What's that?
It's got to work for both people, is what you're saying. And I think what we talk about a lot on the show is the time when you have to work together and the time when it's time for that relationship to be over. Do you know what I mean? So, like, it's not going to be great and fun for both parties all the time. I don't think any romantic relationship would be. And I think it'd be actually pretty boring if it was like that. So, I think sometimes it doesn't work for one of the other persons. And, depending on what you're like, maybe that means that relationship ends.
Yeah, yeah, because relationships take work. There will be bumps along the road in any relationship, but I can say from experience, you will know deep in your heart when there is just no coming back from a relationship gone south.
Hmm.
In your heart, you will know that a particular relationship has to end. You may fight against it. That's going to be your first instinct because especially if you're talking about a 10, 20, 30-year marriage or something like that, you think of all the things you did together and blah blah blah, when at the end of the day it's like put in the work that needs to be done, but also listen to that voice inside that is really telling you this isn't working.
Hmm.
If more people did that, I think then a lot more people would be happy.
Yeah. So, none of this is simple, folks. It is all very complicated, as most things that involve humans are. We are gonna just take a look around and see the kitties playing and other great stuff in our lives, even though we are not have children together. And I do not have children at all. I never feel like my life is missing anything.
Which is as it should be, because you are not missing out on anything. Like think of all the experiences you would have had to have missed if you were a parent.
Exactly. And they don't just come out and do the right things. You have to do the right things by them.
Yeah. I don't think the nursery at Burning Man would be fun.
I'm sure there is a baby camp, a camp full of babies.
Next to the orgy tent. Anyway.
Yeah, perhaps they're related. I don't know.
Anyway, any other thoughts for our friends at home?
No?
All right. Thank you all for listening, folks. Bye-bye. Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.